Hello again, excited to talk about our topic today with you. And if you weren't sure, we really are doing these questions live. So please do text in if you have any questions. I promise it's, if we get it on the text message, we'll try and get to it today. But something you might not know is how we even developed this series in the first place. You see, a few months ago, we actually sent out an email to a lot of the people at our church just asking for some questions up front that they wanted answered. And then we took the questions that we received and we kind of clumped them together into thematically similar ideas. And then it was those clumps that generated each of the weekly topics. And so one of the clumps that came up, we got a lot of questions on this, was this question about fake Christians, who's legit and who's phony. And guys, I agree with every one of you who sent in a question along these lines. This is a real problem. We've got an issue with fake Christians. At the very least, think of it this way. There are over 2 billion people in the world who claim to be Christian. At least a couple of those have to be posers, right? The fact is, we've got fake Christians all around us. You see them, I see them, we recognize them all the time. We've even got different categories, right? We got all kinds of fake Christians. You got your ho-hums, you got your hypocrites, you even got your heretics. You got all these different kinds of Christians floating around, and you're gonna recognize these categories, right? You got your ho-hums. Like, these are the Christians, they're technically Christian, but you don't necessarily see them do much with their faith, right? Like, these are the ones that maybe come once or twice a year on Christmas and Easter. They're called creasters. And it's okay, by the way, we can talk about them today because it's Memorial Day weekend. Ain't none of them listening to this sermon, so we're safe. It's fine, right? You've seen these people. Or then you got the hypocrites, right? These are the people that actually have a faith and do something with it, but they do the wrong thing. They don't do the right thing with their faith. And I probably don't even need to list an example here because you've got someone in your mind right now that you know exactly who you think this is. And then even worse, above even all these, then you have even these heretics. These are the people that don't even believe the right thing with their faith. Like, these are the people that have their creeds wrong, their confessions wrong, maybe they even have their entire doctrine, theology, and faith system wrong. These are the heretics, right? And you've seen these people, they're all around, they're in your life, they're in your church. And it's important that we recognize who these people are and how to know who they are, because Jesus himself talks about these kinds of people. He talks about fake believers. Here's what he has to say in Matthew. He says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. And thus, by their fruit, will you recognize them." And I don't know about you, but I know a lot of rotten fruit trees, don't you? In fact, frustratingly, it feels like a lot of them are the ones leading our country through this coronavirus problem right now, doesn't it? But the fact is, I know people, so many people who are doing the wrong things, believing the wrong things, who it seems like they have just completely missed the boat on this whole Jesus thing. These are the fake Christians. And you and I would be, I think, well suited to be professional pruners, wouldn't we? Again, I don't know about you, but I feel like I see very clearly the way other people's fruit has gotten dangerously bad. All right, you look at the people around you, you look at the choices that they're making, you look at the things they're espousing, their beliefs, and you look at them and you realize, boy, they just do not get it. But one of the things that this coronavirus has forced me to do is I've spent a lot less time being around other people in order to judge their fruits, to identify the rotten ones. And instead, I've been forced to pay a little more attention to the fruit in my own life. And when I look at the fruit in my life, it's not what I would have wanted or expected or even assumed that it should be. You see, where I would hope to see fruit in my life of joy and peace and adventure and fun, I feel like more often than not, the fruit I see is anxiety, dread, fear. And if we're gonna take Jesus at his word that you recognize and you discern what kind of trees people are based on their fruit, my fruit says that I'm a pretty anxious tree. And now these categories of fake Christians that we're looking at, I have to take real seriously, and I have to ask them about myself. Do I take my own faith seriously enough? Am I living my life consistently enough according to what I claim to believe? And do I even believe the right things? And there are days where I struggle with each and every one of these questions. And if you don't, then I'll let you know this. There is someone out there that knows you that thinks you should be. There are people that judge me all the time, and I feel this. There are people in my social circle that actually believe, that have made clear to me that they think I am a ho-hum Christian. Again, I'm not too worried about them right now because they don't watch my sermons, so it's fine. But there are people that question my own hypocrisy and whether I'm a consistent enough believer. Do we talk about the right things from the pulpit? We have people ask that question all the time. There is someone out there who thinks that I'm not living the right way for the faith that I espouse. And there are sure people out there that don't think I believe the right things. And I know that because I think they believe the wrong things. And if I think a Muslim or a Mormon believes the wrong things about Jesus, that means they think I believe the wrong things about him too. And who's right? Makes it even harder because there are even people of my own denomination. There are Lutheran pastors who think that I am a heretic. They think I'm believing the wrong things, either about the Bible or about our confessions or something. And so we have to wrestle with this question, who are the fake Christians? I sure think it's other people. I think it's the ones whose fruit that I have pegged. But the fact is my fruit isn't everything I'd like it to be. And for every person that I question the validity of their faith, there's another handful that are questioning the validity of mine. And so how do we tell? How do I know the difference between a legit, real Christian and a fake one? And this isn't just academic. Jesus himself says that this matters for eternity. See, here's how he continues this discussion in Matthew. He says, look, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, judgment day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name drive out demons? And in your name perform many miracles? And then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evil doer. This is why we got to get this right. Because at the end of the day, every one of us is going to be standing before God. We're going to be asking this question of, were we the real ones or were we the fake ones? And there's some subset that Jesus is going to be saying to them, I never knew you. And so let's break down this first word, is this word evildoers. This is a big deal, and we need to get this right. That when Jesus says evildoer, he is not talking about your everyday run-of-the-mill sinner. And the fact is that Jesus loves sinners. In fact, if he got a criticism for his ministry, it was that he spent too much time with sinners, which means that if you're out there and you are a broken person, you are hurting, you sin regularly and frequently, this is not actually the passage that's about you. The passage that's about you, it says that God himself loved you so much that even while you were yet a sinner, he loved you enough to die for you and to send Jesus Christ, his son. See, but here Jesus is talking about a whole different group of people. He's talking about these evildoers, people who deny a fundamental reality of faith and truth. People who deny that there's any right or wrong way to understand Jesus or that it matters at all. This is the evildoer that Jesus is talking about. And so we have to look a little more deeply at, all right, well, what does that mean? Who is he actually trying to warn us about? And what's the filter? What's the way that we know whether we're someone Jesus will claim to know at the end of days versus someone that he will deny? And the clue is a little earlier in that passage when Jesus said this particular and interesting phrase. He talks about the will of my Father. The people who do the will of my Father in heaven, those are the ones that are not the false prophets. Those are the ones that I will know. And immediately I think we jump to, this is morality. Doing the will of my Father is being moral, doing all the right things, not being a hypocrite, one of those fake Christians we've been talking about. But it's really important to know that that is explicitly not what this can mean. Because notice what Jesus is contrasting the will of my Father with. These people that he denied, these people that he says he never knew. Did you catch the things that they were doing? They were casting out demons. They were doing miracles. They were living the right way. And he says, you are not doing the will of my Father. So it's not this idea that, oh, the will of my Father, it's the 10 Commandments, it's living biblically and morally and following all the rules. That's not it at all. Because in fact, the very people who lived morally, who did all of these amazing things in Jesus' name that you would think would count as good fruit from a good tree. I mean, if I ever saw someone cast out a miracle, I'd be pretty impressed. Cast out a demon and do a miracle, I'd be super impressed. And yet Jesus says, that's not good fruit. So what is the will of my Father? Well, we get a couple of glimpses of it in a few other passages in Scripture. See, there's this moment where the people turn to Jesus and they say to Jesus, we want to do the will of the Father. So please tell us, and they ask him this question in John 6, and so they ask Jesus, what must we do to do the works God requires, right? They're hip to this question. It's about the will of the Father, doing the will of the Father, and so they ask Jesus point blank, we want to do the will of the Father, and he answers them, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. No morality, no rules. It's not about how good of a miracle worker you are. It is simply this question, do you believe in the one he has sent? And now already some people get a little steered wrong with this because in our culture, we have made this concept of belief a purely intellectual concept. We've said, hey, as long as you affirm the right doctrines, as long as you believe what you're supposed to believe, that counts. As long as someone can ask you, do you believe all of the creeds, all of the confessions, all of the Bible, do you believe all those things? And you check your little box and you say, yes, that must be what that means. But Jesus goes on in another section in John. He says this in John chapter 15. You want to know what it looks like to believe in the one God has sent? It means to remain in me the way I want to remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. And neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. And if you remain in me and I in you, then you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And this is the point that believing in Jesus is not just about intellectually agreeing that someone 2,000 years ago existed. It's willing to trust in him as the source of your life. To say that this is the most important thing that I can understand, the way I can orient my life around is this truth that there is a life giver. There is God who conquered death for me, and I will root myself in him. You see, here's the mistake we make when we look at people's fruits or even our own fruits, is you can't actually fix fruit directly. If I'm looking at my life and I think, oh, I've got some rotten apples here, I've got some things I don't like, I can't actually change the apples. And yet we spend so much of our effort and our time and therapy on trying to fix our rotten apples. When the fact is, that's not actually how gardening works. If the fruit's bad, you don't do anything about the fruit. You go to the source of the tree. You go to the roots. And if you're looking at your own life and if you're questioning your own validity of faith, your own Christianity, and whether you're one of the legit ones, and if you're noticing that there's a distinct lack of the fruit you'd like to see, the answer isn't, crap, I gotta fix my fruit. The answer is, crap, I haven't been clinging to Jesus enough. I haven't been grafting myself to him and only him, trusting him to give me the nutrients, the resources, the life and the energy that I need to live the way I want to live, to bear the fruit that I want to bear? You see, this completely changes the posture of the question. See, these people were going to Jesus at the end of the day and they were saying, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And he's saying, that's not the right question. Or sometimes I feel like I'm saying, Lord, Lord, aren't I trying really hard? And he says, that's not the right question either. Or we say, Lord, Lord, I told all those other people how fake they were. And he's like, that's not it. Or maybe it's, Lord, Lord, I believed all the right things about you. He says, that's not it either. For some of us, it's even, Lord, Lord, look how much money I gave to the poor. Still not enough, Jesus says. The only valid question when we're talking with God on that last day, the only valid question that helps us orient ourselves rightly in this life right now is this one: Lord, Lord, I need you. And when you make that statement, that's the difference between someone that Jesus denies and someone that Jesus says, you need me? I'm right here. I was just waiting for you to recognize your own need so that I could swallow you up in my love and mercy and compassion and hold you tight forever. Lord, Lord, I need you. That's what a branch says to its vine. That's what a rotten tree says to its roots. It says, I need you, God, because I don't have enough to do this on my own. You see, I think we got to get away from this question of who's a fake Christian, who's a legit Christian. And I think to really hone in on the real problem, the thing that we need to know for our own lives and for helping others is this question. Is a true Christian is not defined by creeds and actions and behaviors. They're defined by one very simple thing. Do you repent and rely on Christ alone? That's it. That's the only question you can ask a branch or a tree is, do you need the source of life for you to grow and flourish? And do you recognize that nothing else is actually going to bring you life? And do you recognize that this person, this God-made man, is the only one who can change anything for you? And then a lot of other things flow out of this question. You do start to get into some theology and some creeds and some confessions. Some other things happen because of this. But at its core, this is the question. And this is the question alone. And if we understand this question, if we strip away all of the external stuff, all of the things that are distracting, I think we actually start to be able to make a difference in our lives and in the lives of others. You see, this question of are you one who needs Jesus suddenly becomes the filter that actually helps us navigate life. So look at it this way. All right, the right filter is not fake Christian versus real Christian. It's at an individual level, asking the question, do you know, do you realize, do you understand and deeply feel this need for Jesus Christ in your life? And first, let me start with a warning that this is not there's not a filter that we use in order to judge others. I didn't read it today, but if you look at the beginning of this passage today in Matthew 7, it starts with Jesus saying, don't judge unless you want to be judged yourself. So even as he's talking to us about identifying fruit, it's not for the sake of judging others. If anything, it's for the sake of having compassion on others. Right? If you look at someone and you just see someone that does not feel a need for Jesus, it's not so you can condemn them, it's so you can pity them. And you can just say, poor soul, you don't even know what you're missing. And maybe that's an avenue so that you don't have to be angry, you don't have to be condemning of them, you don't have to be judging them. You can just simply feel sad for them. And let your pity maybe move you to love and compassion, and maybe let that be a thing that ultimately changes their lives. This filter is never meant to judge, to divide, to say that some people are in the in group and some people are in the out group. Here's the thing, guys. As a pastor, I don't know who the fake Christians are. I just don't. I don't know which of the people sitting in my pews are really not the ones that should belong here, and I don't know which of the people out there are actually secretly clinging to Jesus with every fiber of their being. And if I don't know, I don't think you do either. But I can let this filter guide me to some compassion and mercy for people that I suspect maybe don't realize exactly how much they need Jesus. But then once this is my filter, this isn't just about other people, this is about me. Now I can have confidence in my salvation. When I'm confronted with this story where Jesus says, hey, there's people that I'm going to be denying at the end of time. There's a narrow road that leads to eternal salvation. And this helps me, and I hope that it helps you to go, do I realize I need Jesus? Okay, that's the end of the discussion. And here's the thing, it starts out with just needing him for salvation. But what's happened as I've gotten older and hopefully a little bit wiser is I've come to recognize and feel my deep need for Jesus in far more wide-ranging ways than just whether I'm getting into heaven or not. Getting married made me realize how much I need Jesus, because it's hard living with someone 24/7. Having kids made me realize how much I need Jesus, because my goodness, they put so many expectations and hopes on me that I just can't bear the thought of letting them down. Doing the hard work that we do makes me realize every morning that I won't do it well. I won't get through the day if I don't have Jesus in my corner. And as I look around at plagues and things that are outside of my control, all the more do I realize I need Jesus, not just to get into heaven, just to take my next step, just to navigate one more weird social circumstances we try to help keep people alive right now. This also matters as we decide who we choose to follow. You see, the context of Jesus' statements, he's talking about the false prophets. And prophets are not just your casual, everyday believer. These are the leaders. He was talking about the religious and civic leaders of the day. And he was saying, in fact, that when it comes to a leader, you should be judging a leader by their fruit. You should be discerning whether this is someone you trust and believe and whether this is someone that you don't. And this filter is the one that helps me. When I look at the leaders that are around me, both the ones that I get to choose and the ones I don't get to choose, this question is the filter that helps me out. Are they someone who needs Jesus Christ, who professes not just a belief in a creed, but actually recognizes and admits that they need Jesus too? And if there's a leader out there who says with one breath that he believes in God, and then with the next breath says that he doesn't need to ask God for forgiveness for anything because he's never done anything wrong, alarm bells should go off. And you should be thinking about whether this is one of those false prophets you want to be careful about following. But then ultimately and finally, and this is where I think it comes in most for me, is that this question, this filter, helps me choose where to spend my precious time and resources. Because here's the thing, if I need Jesus and you need Jesus, then we can live lives of mutual blessing and encouragement of each other. You can have people in your Ironman group or in your women's Bible study or just people in your life, and if you all recognize that you need Jesus together, you will have lives of fruitfulness with each other. And yet there are people that don't necessarily feel that way, that I choose not to spend my time with. And I'll even say this, there are people in my own denomination, people that believe all the right things, but I see in them that they have put all of their trust in their correct doctrine, in their right understanding of the confessions, and I see someone who doesn't actually live their life with a deep-seated need for Jesus in their life because they've already solved all those problems. And now, in fact, their need is in something else entirely. And again, that's gonna be between them and Jesus at the end of the day, but for now, it's the thing that lets me decide, it's just not worth it. It's not worth my time. I have other people that I could be spending time with, and in fact, this is the last point I wanna make. There are people out there who don't realize how much they need Jesus, but they know they need something. And those people are worth my time all day long, because I can join up with them in our mutual needs, that they know they need something, they know they're missing something, and they're not quite sure what it is, but I know that I need someone. And it's my daily reliance on him that has brought my life the fruit of joy and peace and contentment that it does have. And I can share that with people in a wholehearted and sincere way, because if they need something and I need someone, then we can mutually reinforce and encourage each other in that. And so I hope that that's helpful for you. In case it wasn't everything you wanted to hear, let's take some of your questions.
All right, let's get in this Q&A portion. Thank you, Doug. If you have any questions, you can text your questions in 636-498-9282. But maybe just while we're getting some questions in, I want to lay a little bit of a practical groundwork. So if someone was listening to your message and they hear, well, I'm not deluded, I am a sinner, I know that. I've got some anger issues, I've got, whatever those things would be. you're saying, well, don't work on that anger directly. You need to spend time with Jesus. So can you maybe clarify some of that? Like, what does it mean to spend time with Jesus to kind of work out these fruits that come out later on?
Oh yeah, great question, John. Thanks for asking it. So it's kind of like this idea of treating the symptoms rather than treating the disease. It's like thinking that if you get chicken pox and like, oh, if I just focus on the itchy parts, then that'll cure the chicken pox. That's not how it works. And so I think if we spend too much time focusing on the fruits themselves without changing the underlying cause of those things, if you're angry all the time, you're angry for a reason. There's something
there
going on, and to just rely on some sort of technique, like, oh, I need to count to 10, or oh, I need to do these breathing techniques. Breathing might be helpful, but to really look at the root of it, and what I would suggest is that the root of our fruit is always going to be a lack of clinging to Christ. Like that's where that's going to come from. And every negative thing in my life is because I'm not turning that area of my life over to Jesus. And so what that maybe looks like to cling, I love that vine and branch analogy, is just to think of yourself as a receptacle. You bring things in, like you bring food in, you bring ideas in, and then out of the overflow of that is what then you release out into the world. And to change what you're bringing in is the best way I know of to cling to Jesus. Just one example for me is that I used to start my day with a pretty deep dive into the news of the last 24 hours. And I'd go through the various news sites. And a few years ago, I finally shifted. And now I start my day with Bible time. And I know that sounds so cliche. And I still read the news because it's important to know what's going on. But it makes such a difference when I instead treat the news as something to just get a quick sampling, make sure I'm aware of the current events, but I let my starting day, I let my deep dive actually be in the words of Jesus. I read the Bible, I pray, I invite God to speak into my life. That changes everything. That's the way I've found to cling more closely to Jesus and let the fruit take care of itself.
Well, thank you. I think that's probably helpful for a lot of people. The first question here that we have is, how do you respond to someone who is in a religion that is not Christian, but they say that they are?
Oh, okay.
They have the same language, etc.
That's just like horribly don't line up. This is a great question, because this gets at so much of what we've been doing with this kind of fake Christian bat that we swing at people. It's about dividing and being kind of divisive and say, oh, you don't count, you're not. And I think the big thing is to honor the person and also to trust that Christ is bigger than our flaws. That's one of the things that he promises, that there's no sin that we can commit that outdoes his mercy and his grace and his goodness. And the reality is, maybe I'll start with our own denomination. There are a lot of very precise doctrinal positions of the Lutheran Church. I suspect 90% of our church body, if not more, would not be able to articulate precisely what we believe about Jesus. Just to give one example, if we talk about the Trinity, people know we believe in the Trinity. You actually ask people about the Trinity, and you get immediately a lot of very wrong answers about the Trinity. Yeah. And yet we wouldn't look at that person and say, "Well, you're done. You're a bad believer." And so even in a lot of these faiths, you have people with very wrong ideas about Jesus. But what I would suggest to approach them is to focus on the right thing that they have, and that gets back to that question: do you need Jesus? There are Mormons who their doctrine is not what is considered an Orthodox Christian doctrine. That they are not a part of the brotherhood of Christianity, although they would say that they are. Mm-hmm. But most Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox Christians would not include Mormons in the group. But yet, I know a lot of Mormons who know they need Jesus. And that is an area of commonality. And that's not me saying that, oh, that's just as good, or their doctrine doesn't matter. But it's me saying that when you're talking about a personal relationship with someone, and if they need Jesus, that's your common ground. And from there, once you have mutual respect and you care about them and they care about you, and you guys know that about each other, then I think that it's worthwhile having some conversations. But they're conversations from a disposition of of I love you, I care about you, not conversations from you're wrong, you're a heretic, here's what you need to get right about Jesus before we can have any further interaction.
Well, let me cut in here because there's a question about that. So is there a good way to handle or help people who we may think are fake Christians?
Good way to handle or help people who may think they are fake Christians. That's a really great question. Handle or help people who may think, who we may think. We think they're fake Christians. We want to help them. Okay. Yeah, so for me, I think it comes down to one of the things I've learned over the last few years especially is you can only take so much ownership of other people's problems. And I have people in my life that have all sorts, like that have anger issues, for example. I'm like, man, you're angry. And I think for a long time, Christians have seen themselves as the babysitters of the world and of the culture, and like, you got an anger issue, and I'm the one that sees it, and don't worry, I got the plank out of my own eye first, so I can tell you all about your anger issues now. And what we're learning is you have power over your life. You can change your life. You cannot change someone else's. You can be influential in someone else's. And so what I would say is if we think someone's a fake Christian, that's not ultimately something for us to feel this burden that we have to correct their fakeness. But what I think we can do and should do, so to answer this question, is to model over and over again our need for Jesus in a way that maybe would help expose for them, like, oh, that's a new way of thinking. And I'll share an example that my wife does, because we have a lot of neighbors that we really try to engage with who are not Christians. And I love how winsome and effective my wife is when we have these interactions. But we have a neighbor over a couple years ago that's not a believer. And all my wife said, and the fruit that we saw is she's kind of an anxious parent, really struggling with stuff. And my wife just said, you know what? I mess up with my kids all the time. I was yelling at my daughter just this morning, but I just thank God that Jesus forgives me, and every day I start new, and every day it's a clean slate with him, and that gives me the strength to every day try and forge a new connection with my daughter. Wow. Yeah. And none of that was corrective of this neighbor or this person, and they did have a wonky belief system I'm not going to get into. None of it was attacking or going directly at this wrong belief. What it was doing was just modeling as parent to parent, man, I need Jesus. Thank God for Jesus, because Jesus gives me the fresh slate with my daughter every day. And so when you talk about people that we think are fake Christians, is you don't start with correction, you start with modeling that need for Jesus. And that's why I think that's the filter that I've really landed on over the years, that's the question. Do you need Jesus? It short circuits a lot of arguments. I don't have to correct the wrong doctrine of someone else, but I can point to a better way. Yeah. And I think that better way is itself ultimately very winsome and does result in course correction, because we're not trying to kind of forcibly make that happen on our own timeline.
That's awesome. When we're talking about this clean slate idea or a refresh from forgiveness, this person has a question about kind of extreme sin. So I'm sure this is probably not an exact number here, but 10,000 murders. Could they do something like really, really extreme and then say, I believe in you, I believe in you, Jesus, or I believe in you, God, and still go to heaven?
Still go to heaven. Yeah, so actually I talked about this almost exact situation a couple of weeks ago. So if you have a chance, go back and watch the message on good enough, whether it's good enough to get into heaven. But just to kind of reframe here, the picture is, I believe in you and then go to heaven. Yeah, the picture is we get very hung up on the comparative sins, and it really bothers us that, hey, that person, littered a little bit, and then that person murdered 10,000 people, and those are different. But the fact is, all sin is ultimately disconnecting. It's disconnecting us from other people, and it's disconnecting us from God. And the power and the beauty of this is that however trivial the sin, however large the sin, God himself is the one who overcomes the disconnection. God is the one who says, it doesn't matter how little, it doesn't matter how big, even though you sinned, and even though that sin took you away from me, God is the one who fights for us and pulls us back in. And he loves us so deeply. It's like the mom that just, the cliche that, oh, my son could murder someone, and a mom would still love her son. That's how God feels about each and every one of us, that there's nothing you or I could do that is so bad that it would make God cease to love us or cease to want to have us with him in heaven. And so on the one hand, we can look at that and say that feels unfair, but the way I'd encourage us to look at it is that shows the depth and the magnitude of God's overpowering love for us.
So the short answer is yes.
Short answer is yes. Thank
cool.
you, John, for the Cliff's notes, the John's notes.
Here's one about judging. So aren't we judging others by calling out fake Christians?
Yeah, and so that's where I think that there's two words that Jesus uses in this passage, and I didn't really underscore it, so thank you for asking this, whoever did. Jesus talks about identifying trees by their fruit, but in the very same section that he says, but don't judge. And so that's what I was trying to talk about at the end there in my kind of last list of 4 things, that I think we are called to be shrewd. I think we're called to pay attention and observe people around us for the sake of helping diagnose people. I mean, it's like a doctor saying, well, I shouldn't judge diseases, and so I'm just, you're all just healthy to me, right? Like that would be an ineffective doctor. We want to be effective. We want to identify the fruit in ourselves, in our own lives, and the fruit in others. But because of that direct contrast that Jesus draws, I think you can identify fruit without judging someone for it. And so the judging to me is where we start to say, who's a real Christian and who isn't, who's getting into heaven and who isn't. And the answer to that question, if we're going the John's Notes version, is we can't tell. You cannot know whether someone is a true Christian or not in this life. Like the only way we will know that answer is when we get to heaven and you'll look around and you'll be like, oh, you got in? Okay, you must have been a true Christian. Like we will only know that question in hindsight once we are in eternity with God. So we cannot judge people's heaven, and then we can't judge the validity of their faith, because the only person, the Bible tells us, and I think is obvious in human nature, the only person who can see the heart of someone else is God. I cannot see your heart, John. And so I can't judge your heart. I can't judge the validity of your faith. I can't judge your status in heaven, in or out. But I can identify your fruits. And so I can say to you, John, when we work together, John and I, and so there can be situations where I say, hey, John, when you do this thing, it doesn't bless me. It makes it harder for me to work with you. I can identify that there's a fruit you're having, that there's a behavior that you're manifesting that's maybe not helpful to me personally. Or if it's a little more theoretical, it's not necessarily at me, it's at someone else. I can say, hey, I'm worried about you. Like, and this is not true about John, but
It happens all the time.
But John, I feel like you're drinking a lot, and I'm worried about you. I noticed that, since coronavirus hit, like your alcohol intake has increased a little bit. That's not true about John. But I could point that out, and I'd be identifying a fruit, and I'm not speculating on whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. I'm not even ultimately saying that I think you're an alcoholic. I'm saying, hey, I've noticed a behavior. I'm worried about you, and because I love you, I'm just asking. Yeah. And that's a different posture than judging someone, calling them out. And so in the same way, you can identify behaviors, and you can say to someone, hey, I think you're on a bad path. Or I can speak to maybe another Christian or someone that I'm in community with, and we're looking at this fake Christian thing, and I can say, hey, let me just pick kind of an example out of thin air. Hey, you haven't been plugging into church lately, like even online, like you're not really doing a lot of things. And again, that's not a thing that defines a real Christian or not, whether you attend church regularly. It is a helpful thing, it's beneficial, it's what connects you to that source, the vine, that we are the branches of. But I wouldn't say to someone, hey, you haven't been going to church regularly, you must be a fake Christian. That's where we get into judging. What I can say is, hey, you haven't gone to church regularly. Are you getting the spiritual feed that you need to get through life? Are you feeling like you're doing okay? And maybe they'll say, yeah, I'm doing great. I don't actually need church that much. And that's ultimately, at that point, I say, okay, well, I've expressed my concern. I'm now not going to say, because you disagreed with me, you must be a fake Christian because you're not coming to church. I can still be worried about you. I can still be privately concerned. But at the end of the day, that's where I think the judging comes out of it, is that we can observe behavior, we can even point out troublesome behaviors or even troublesome wrong beliefs. But at the end of the day, that's where we draw the line. We point it out, and if it's denied, if it's rejected, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know.
Well, we are past time, but I'm sending it to overtime because I think this is a really important question just to kind of end on. Flipping it kind of inwards, can someone sincerely think that they believe and trust in Jesus, but truly not believe? So this kind of self-delusion, maybe I think of a teenager who's like, am I in? Like, do I believe enough? Or like, that whole kind of question you ask of yourself.
Oh yeah. Well, and John, thanks for going into OT for this, because I think this is so important. And this is what I hope the whole thrust of my message for the first 25 minutes is that if we think of belief, I'm going to start with belief, as being this mere intellectual assent, as believing the right things about Jesus, having the right doctrine, then I think there are a lot of people who sincerely believe in Jesus and yet don't. That don't have that life-saving, eternity faith, because it's not just an intellectual proposition. The book of James says, even the demons believe in Jesus, but then they tremble in fear because of that belief. So it's not enough to know that Jesus is the Son of God, that he's the Lord of the universe. The demons know that. It's not helpful for them. But that's why I'm glad whoever wrote this question, you included this word, because I think this is the word that we can rely on. And that's why for me, the question is less, do you believe in Jesus? Although, that's a perfectly fair terminology, people use that. But for me, it's a little confusing, and what really cuts through the confusion is, do you need Jesus in your life? And that's where I think that there are pastors out there who don't need Jesus in their life. They come up and they confidently proclaim the Bible every week. They don't need Jesus. They got everything figured out. And that's why one of the reasons I think Dion and I preach a little differently is because we're very willing to come up here every week and say, guys, here's how I need Jesus this week. And we're not coming from this position of having our act together or we've got our lives figured out, because if we did, that would maybe mean we don't need Jesus. So for me, I think it is possible for someone to think they believe in Jesus and have that moment at the end times where he says, I didn't know you. I don't think it's possible. And if you are someone who's worried about this, then ask this question in your heart. Do you feel this need of Jesus in your life? And if you do, you're gonna be all right. That's the gospel promise that Jesus makes, is you're gonna be all right. If you are just willing to say that you need Jesus more than anything, and forget this intellectual belief stuff, forget whether you have all the right doctrine in place or not. If you know you need Jesus, he will answer that call. He will meet you in your need, and he will carve out a place for you. That is his guarantee and his promise. That's not mine. That's not my opinion. That's Jesus's promise, and that's the phrasing that helps me a little better than this.
Well, hey, thank you for sticking with us as we went a little bit long today. We had more questions. We will answer more questions on our podcast on Tuesday afternoon. And if you have any more questions, you can also just text them to that number as well.
Thanks, John, and thank you for just being vulnerable enough and honest with us that you wanted to share your questions with us. This is an honor to get to have this dialogue with you, and I hope that it was helpful for you. But let me just seal up everything that we're saying with prayer. Lord God, ultimately, we have these good conversations, but ultimately your word is the only word that matters. And so, Lord, I pray that your word would reign supreme in this moment. And especially in light of that last question, Lord, that if anyone is struggling with this passage, with this warning of Jesus's that we read about, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would be on each and every person, that you would flood them with a sense of your nearness, your love, your grace and compassion for them. And Lord, that I pray that you would take away any fear or doubt, that if someone has any concerns about their place in your community, any place in heaven with you, Lord, that you would just overwhelm that with the confidence that comes from the hope that we get from the gospel of Jesus Christ. That the Lord who says he loves sinners and there is no sin that can keep us away from him, Lord, that we would cling to that hope like people in an ocean clinging to a piece of driftwood. And Lord, that you would bring us safely home to shore. We pray this in your holy name. Amen.